Hi there, my name is Duncan, and in this video I'm going to walk you through the Axidraw Control extension for Inkscape and talk a little bit about how I use it in my plotter work. Getting the software is pretty easy. You go to your web browser and you type in axidraw.com/SW for software. This takes you to the page on the Evil Mad Scientist wiki where you can download the software for Mac, Windows, and Linux. I'm recording this video on Windows, so you'll see the Windows interface, but I use my MacBook for plotting and it's pretty much identical there, so don't worry. Once you've got it installed, you'll find it in Inkscape in the extensions menu at the top of the page under Axidraw Control. You can click that. One thing that's worth noting is that you can use this software even if the Axidraw isn't connected, or even if you don't actually own an Axidraw plotter. That's great if you're away from home and you want to test things out, or if you want to make something for a friend's plotter and you want to be sure that it works. You can use it on any copy of Inkscape, whether or not you've got an Axidraw connected, but obviously it won't send commands if you don't have your Axidraw connected. So this first tab is the basic plotting interface. If you hit apply, then it'll plot whatever is on the screen. You can change this first number to plot multiple copies, and you can leave a gap of the number of seconds between copies in this second box. So these settings would plot 6 copies with 20 seconds between each. In most situations, you'll want this on 1, and then the second one is pretty much redundant. You might want to do multiple copies though if your pen ink isn't quite flowing right, because doing several layers of exactly the same plot can sometimes even out your lines or make the lines thicker. There's various different things you can experiment with there. On the Setup tab, the sliders at the top here let you control the pen height. Every time you change the surface that you're plotting on, you're going to want to test these heights by selecting Toggle Pen between Up, Down, and hitting Apply. When it's down, the pen should be resting just on the surface of the paper, and when it's up, it should be about ½ a centimeter above it. That's a good guide to where you want these set at. You'll need to do a bit of trial and error to make that work. And my pro tip is to put down a sheet of paper, like just rough scrap paper, over the top of the paper that you want to plot on so that it doesn't leave little marks in the corner of the nice paper. The raise pen and turn off motors command is useful if you want to manually move the plot ahead for any reason, but I don't use this very much. The timing tab lets you control speeds and pauses when you're plotting. The most important control is probably the first one. This is the speed at which the plotter moves when the pen is down. I tend to set this at around 10 or 20 if I want really nice smooth lines and detail work, or faster up to 50 to 70 if I'm doing longish, like straight lines. You can change the pen up movement speed if you want. I never do. And acceleration I also generally just leave on standard. There's probably some creative possibilities around line width here if you've got a pen with ink that flows quite fast. I don't know of any reason why you wouldn't want the pen raising speed to not be at maximum, but pen lowering speed, you generally want to keep this a bit slower. You can damage fragile pen nibs if you just let the full force of gravity smash them into the paper repeatedly when you're plotting. So I like to leave this on slow or standard. These optional delays, you can mostly leave these alone. I like to use a couple of milliseconds of pause on pen up just to avoid getting little streaks at the end of lines when my pen height settings aren't quite perfect, but have a little play with them if you want to and see what effect they have. Generally, you don't need to worry too much about them. The Options tab gives you a few handy utilities. You generally always want the page to be set to auto-rotate. This means that portrait images are sent sideways to the Axidraw because the Axidraw can only plot in landscape orientation. So if you send, for example, this, then it will turn it on its side when it's actually being plotted. The constant speed tick box cancels out the acceleration setting from the timing slide. I generally don't use this, and the report time elapsed function is pretty handy. I don't think this is ticked by default, but I really like it because it tells me once I've finished a plot how long the plot took. So yeah, I keep that ticked in most situations. Plot optimization is really useful. This is an algorithm that minimizes the movement of the plot ahead when it's up, when it's not on the paper. You can set it to full, where it'll break apart groups of objects, basic, where it keeps the groups, and none if you want complete control of the order in which things are plotted in. Most of the time I use full, but sometimes when I'm filming it's nice to have total control over the plot order, and so I'll pick none. For the motor resolution, you can pick between slightly smoother and slightly faster. The key word here is slightly. You won't see much of a difference, so don't worry about it too much. I just leave it on smoother most of the time. And this offline preview mode is quite handy. This is probably the most important function on the page. If you have it ticked, then you can hit apply and it'll send a plot to the plotter without actually sending commands. It'll simulate it. This is great for a couple of reasons. First, you can see how the software is reading your image and identify any problems in advance. And second, if you have that report time elapsed box ticked, then it'll estimate how long a plot is going to take with the current settings. So for example, if I have this offline preview mode ticked and I went to this and I had plot optimization set on none, then you can see by hitting apply that it will give me an estimate of about 13 minutes to plot it. It'll also draw in just a second. Yeah, there we go. It'll draw the path that it's going to plot. Pink is pen up, and blue, you can see that there's some blue lines in there as well, is pen down distance. You can control what you actually see using this tick box here. If, on the other hand, I set it to full optimization, then this mess becomes much less messy, and the time that it will take to plot should be significantly less. Yeah, it's 3 minutes faster to plot it without this. And if I hit OK, then yeah, you can see that it is a much more orderly plot setup. The manual tab, I never use this tab. It's basically there for if you want to give the plotter very specific commands. You can walk the carriage to a specific X or Y position, raise or lower the pen, enable or disable the motors, enter bootloader mode if you want to play with that for some reason. This last bit here is occasionally very handy. I'll explain it. Normally when you're plotting, Inkscape saves information about how far you are through the plot in the SVG itself. And this is great because if you need to stop halfway through for whatever reason, then you can pause it using the hardware button on the side of the Axidraw, save the file, close Inkscape, even shut down your computer and then resume later. And I'll talk about resuming in a minute. But if you don't want that information in the file for whatever reason, then you can strip it out with this command. The Layers tab lets you plot different layers of a file one at a time, and that's handy if you want to plot multiple colors. I use this quite a lot for that. To use it, you just need layers that start with numbers. So for example, I have 1 red, 2 blue here. Just make sure the right objects are part of the right layers in the interface. And then you just pick which number you want to plot to start with in this box and hit apply on this tab to only plot that layer. One thing that I should highlight here is that this first sentence here, normally all paths from all visible layers will be plotted. Another way to accomplish the same thing is to just hide the layers that you don't want to plot in the Inkscape interface and then just use the regular plot tab and it'll only plot the ones that you can see. It is worth noting, though, that the Layers tab uses these copies to plot and seconds of delay settings on the layer thing. So if you've got this set to plot more than once and you've got it on the Layers thing, then it will plot layer 1 twice. Pause and resume. Yeah, if you have some kind of disaster when you're plotting or if you just want to stop for a moment, then the way to deal with it is, again, to hit that physical pause button on the side of the Axidraw. That brings the plotting process to a stop, and to start it up again, you just select the resume option here and hit apply. If you don't want to resume, then you can just tell it to return to the home corner, you know, if you don't want to resume for whatever reason. And then finally, the config tab. I rarely touch this tab, but it's quite important when you first get your plotter that you go to the first option here and you select the model that you have from this list. Otherwise, I think it defaults to the A4 size, and then you won't be able to plot anything larger than that. The second option is only useful if you've got multiple Axidraw plotters connected at the same time, in which case you're a pretty lucky human being. You can choose to plot to the first one that it finds, or all of the ones exactly identically at the same time, or one that's named in this box here. I just leave it on use first Axidraw located because I only have one Axidraw. And then the final thing you can do on this page is just hit apply, and it'll give you the version number of the software you're using in a box. Here we go. 257 is the one that I'm using here. And if you've got the Axidraw connected, you'll also see the firmware version 2. It'll check for updates and it'll tell you if you need to upgrade. That's pretty much all of the software. The only other things to make you aware of are probably a handful of utilities in this folder here. Axidraw naming lets you name your plotter in case you have more than one. Disable XY motors is just a shortcut to disable the motors on your Axidraw. Again, that's occasionally handy if you need to move the plotter head by hand. Hershey text lets you convert regular computer fonts to stroke fonts. That's pretty important if you want to include text in your plot, but I'm not going to go into that now. I'll do a full tutorial on that another time. Hatch fill lets you convert filled areas of your SVG into hatching or cross-hatching. Again, I'll cover that in full another time, but it's how I use to fill in these eyes here. And then finally, plot optimization runs the same algorithm for optimization that I described before, but it actually changes the order of the layers in the document. It can be worth running this separately if you're plotting several copies of something complicated and you want to save a little time, but mostly you don't need this because it runs automatically when you hit the plot button. So that's pretty much all for today. If you found this video useful, then the best thing that you can do is hit the subscribe button. And if you've already done that, then you can hit the like button, and that'll do us a favor because more people might see it. If you have any comments about how the Axidraw software works or any other questions about Axidraw plotters, then leave us a comment below. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.